I don't have to tell you, it goes without saying, we're at war against the terrorists. And I'm going to try to present a thesis. I don't know if I'll get to it tonight. It may take one more discussion, that we are in a very, very special, unique opportunity. And what I mean to say is that I'm going to try to prove, if possible, you could fight me on this if you like. That's you're the jury here. The position in halacha is that in the context of what we're facing today, we can kill terrorists. That's it. Just kill them. Whereas on other occasions, it's quite possible that we didn't have that opportunity, that the halacha would not condone just simply killing terrorists. Because basically, again, in the general sense, not in this particular circumstance, there's a legal system, what we call a bezdin. And when a person is involved in a criminal act, he has to be condemned by bezdin, meaning the criminal, we could say, has the right to be taken into custody and stand in front of a bezdin and try to defend himself. And we can't just circumvent bezdin. We can't take the law into our own hands. You know, a person could be guilty of a crime, and it's a capital crime, but we can't just simply put him to death. We have to take him to bezdin, and there's a whole juridic process, and the jury system, you know, the system of the courts, they'll decide what his punishment is. Now, as you know, I don't have to tell you this, in Israeli law, at this present time, we don't put terrorists to death. We lock them up in jail. Now, what happens when you lock up, the terrorists get locked up in jail? Well, we know for a fact, and history has proved this more than once. I mean, the outstanding example would be Gilad Shalit. You know, how many Jews were killed by the 1,000 terrorists that were freed from jails, including, you know, terrorists that what's the word I need in English to orchestrate this entire massacre that took place on Shabbos of Shmini Atzeres. You know what I'm saying? We put terrorists into jail, and at the end, what happens is they become part of an exchange. You know, terrorists and hostages, terrorists, and at the end of the day, the terrorists are let out of jail. Like, for example, the pigua that happened in Yerushalayim in the bus stop just 5 days ago. I mean, these were terrorists that were let out of jail. So again, if, you know, I'm giving an introduction to an introduction because we're sort of stalling for Yechiel to come, and I'm spilling the beans here that my goal, if I can convince you that I'm right, is that we have now a golden opportunity. No one is asking us, not halachically, nor according to Israeli law, to spare the lives of the terrorists. And we're going to go after them, and we're going to kill them. It's a golden opportunity. I'm not trying to make life easy. It's a difficult task, and we'll lose. You know, there's sacrifices here. I'm not saying no. But just if we could focus on the idea of neutralizing terrorists, we really have a golden opportunity in the framework of this war against Hamas. And it's a golden opportunity even from a halachic perspective. And under normal situations, you know, if we have to run after a terrorist, that means we have to take him into jail. We can't just shoot him in the head. That would be the normal situation. So look, Rabbosai, this was the introduction to the introduction. My apologies go out to Yechiel. It's already, 8 minutes into the time, and I got to just get into the shir. There's a lot of material here. Okay, now the main concept here is the Rodef concept. And this is a sugya in Sanhedrin Ayin Daled. We covered it many, many months ago. And Habola Hargacha Hashkem Lahargo, which means that if a Rodef is pursuing the Nirdaf for the purpose of killing the Nirdaf, then we kill the Rodef. And the Chiddush of Bava Machteres, if you recall, is that the Torah considers the burglar who breaks in and tunnels into the house of the Balabayas as a Rodef, and we could put him to death simply because, as the Gemara puts it, the Balabayas has the right to protect his property and encounter and face the burglar, the Bava Machteres, even if it means putting him to death, which means that the Bava Machteres has already planned beforehand to bring in the weapons that he needs to kill the Balabayas, and that gives him the status of a Rodef. Within the context of a Rodef, on many occasions, we've discussed the concept of a Chiyuv Misa, that the Rodef is Chayiv Misa.
No.
But the Chiyuv Misa of the Rodef is a result of Hatzolas HaNirdaf, which means that the Rodef is now involved in a Meiser Redifa. He's pursuing the Nirdaf, and in order to save the Nirdaf, we kill the Rodef. So the Chiyuv Misa that we're going to put and kill the Rodef is all a result of the fact that he is a Rodef. And the Torah is allowing you to put him to death to save the Nirdaf without having to go through Bezdin, without having to go through the legal channels of taking the Rodef hostage, and bringing him, locking him up in a jail and bringing him in front of a court. We can circumvent that all because he's a Rodef. And that's the big chiddush of the Torah, that you can kill the Rodef. However, what we want to study tonight is the following question, the following issue. Under what circumstances, if any at all, can we kill a Rodef who's not really a Rodef? Now that sounds like contradiction in terms. But we want to try to prove that perhaps there is such a thing as a Rodef that we're allowed to kill, even though he's not involved at this moment in a Meiser Redifa. So again, just to formulate the nidon, the issue that we want to face in halacha, can we halachically categorize a person as a Rodef, put him to death, even though right now, at this moment, he is not involved in a Meiser Redifa? So let me try to prove the exact opposite first, and prove to you that in the following circumstance, which we'll explain, we'll call it X right now, he loses his Shem Rodef, and therefore, if somebody kills him, that someone is Chayiv Misas Bezdin. He'll be put to death, because the so-called Rodef has lost his Shem Rodef. We are mafkia his Shem Rodef. What is the X that we're talking about? This is called in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Yochol Latzilo Be'echad Meivarav. You can save the Nirdaf by injuring one of the organs of the Rodef without having to kill the Rodef. In other words, the circumstance that arises is such that we could save the Nirdaf without killing the Rodef. It's not necessary to kill the Rodef to save the life of the Nirdaf. And if you don't mind, instead of constantly repeating the phrase Yochol Atzilo Bi'echad Meivarav, which sometimes I'm going to have to repeat that phrase 5 times in a sentence, so I need a shortened way of doing that because it's too much of a mouthful for me, I'm going to just call it shoot for the legs. Do you understand? That's a password. When I was a kid, we used to play these games where we made up words that, that would mean things to us, even though they were meaningless words. So I'm going to use the phrase shoot for the legs. And I hope that every time I use that phrase, you'll understand it means Yochol Atzilo Bi'echad Meivarav. Is that okay? just the ground rules for the game. In a case where you could shoot for the legs, the rodef loses his shame rodef. He's no longer considered a rodef. Why? Because the rodef means that we kill the rodef in order to save the nirdaf. If we could save the nirdaf without killing the rodef, he loses his shame rodef. And what's the implication of losing his shame rodef? That if it was a case, a scenario in which you could have shot for the legs and instead you killed the rodef, you are a rotzeach. You will be put to death. He forfeits his shame rodef, and therefore he's not a gavra ketila that you could kill, but on the contrary, he's like a living person on 2 feet, and if you kill him, you're chayav misa. And we're going to try to prove this halachic conclusion based on a sugya Sanhedrin Tes that deals with Avner. So if you have the pages that I asked David to put up on the group, you're turning to the top of page 2. The first source on the top of page 2, which is actually source number 9, because for now we're fast forwarding, leaving out the first 8 sources. Yoav is brought in front of a court and found, based on evidence, having killed Avner. And the court has to determine and hand down a ruling as to whether Yoav is a rotzeach for killing Avner. The evidence is clear, unquestionable, undeniable. Yoav killed Avner. What defense argument does Yoav have on his own behalf, such that the Beis Din will condone his killing of Avner, will let Yoav off the hook?
He was a Gol Adam.
Excellent. Yoav claims, I am a Gol Adam, because Avner killed Asoil, and Asoil is the brother of Yoav. So again, if you can draw this on a little map for yourself. It's Yoav is the brother of Asoil. Avner kills Asoil. Yoav is therefore the Gol Adam, and he kills Avner, and that's his defense for having killed Avner, because he has the status of a Gol Adam. So far, so good. The plot grows thicker. Avner, as it turns out, is a nirdaf, because Asoil is trying to kill Avner, and in the pursuit of Avner, Avner in self-defense kills Asoil, which means that Avner is not a rodef. On the contrary, Avner is a nirdaf. He cannot be considered as a nirdaf for rotzeach for killing the rodef. If Asoil is the rodef, then Avner is allowed to kill Asoil in self-defense, because Asoil is the rodef and Avner is the nirdaf. Therefore, the argument here against Yoav is that Yoav is guilty for murdering Avner, and Yoav is therefore rotzeach, should be put to death, because Avner is not a rotzeach. Meaning, Yoav cannot claim I was a Gol Adam and I killed Avner because Avner was a rotzeach for killing Asoil. No. You're making a big mistake here. Avner had a right to kill Asoil. And why did Avner have a right to kill Asoil? Because Asoil was a rodef and Avner was a nirdaf. And the plot goes thicker. Yoav says, no. Avner had no right to kill Asoil. And he killed Asoil, an innocent person, so to speak. Again, not that he gets shishi, but innocent in the sense that Asoil is not a rodef. Or maybe in a footnote, we'd say he's not a full-fledged rodef. So that the status of Yoav as a Gol Adam is really dependent upon whether or not Asoil is a Rodev, because if Asoil is not a Rodev, then Avner had no right to kill Asoil, and therefore Yoav is the Gol Adam. And now it boils down to the following. Did Yoav have the right to kill Asoil? On the one hand, we say that Asoil is pursuing Avner to kill Avner, and Avner kills Asoil in self-defense, which means that Avner is not a Rotzeach. The goal of Yoav in Bezdin is to establish that Avner is a Rotzeach. How could you call Avner Rotzeach? So the Gemara answers, because Avner did not have to kill Asoil. Even though Avner is the Nirdaf, he could save himself without killing the Rodef. He could have taken a sword and, as we said, shoot for the legs, to use our phrase of Yachal Atzil Befru. Now, if that be the case, then Asoil is no longer Rodef, which means that Avner had no right to kill Asoil, because Avner could have saved himself without killing Asoil. If he went ahead and went too far and he killed Asoil, then he is a murderer. And that's the claim of Yoav, that I was a Gol Adam because Avner is a Rotzeh. So again, Rabbosai, in this whole picture, what we're trying to determine is whether or not Avner, the Nirdaf, is a Rotzeh for killing Asoil. And the Gemara assumes the answer is yes. So the Gemara tries to play with this. The Gemara says maybe Avner was in a situation in which he couldn't save himself without killing Asoil. How do you know that Avner was in a situation of Yochel Atzilas Atzmo, Be'echad Meivarav Shal HaRodef, meaning Shal HaSoil? And the Gemara says the Pasuk indicates that Avner deliberately put the knife into the fifth column of his torso, meaning at the point, as Rashi explains, where he pierced into the kaved and the kol, and he killed him. Meaning, it's not just accidental that Avner killed Asoil. There was a deliberate, even though Avner could have saved himself without killing Asoil. I'm going to use the term cruelly. Again, it's just a metaphorical. He cruelly kills Asoil. And based on that pasuk, Yoav argues that I am a Gol Adam because Avner is a Rotzech. As we said before, the question of the status of Yoav in his judgment depends upon Avner, whether Avner is a Rotzech. And since Avner could have saved himself without killing the Rodef, namely Asoil, when he kills the Rodef Asoil, he is a murderer. He's a Rotzech. And that's why Yoav is off the hook and he's a Gol Adam. That's the Gemara. The Gemara, there's another part of this sugya that's not for us now. The Gemara says even though Yoel is off the hook for killing Avner, nevertheless they put Yoav to death under a different law. He was a Mori B'Malchus. Again, that would require another hour of going through the sugya in Sanhedrin. But the main point for us is that in order to justify killing the Rodef, he has to have a Shem Rodef. And if the Nirdaf could have been saved without killing the Rodef, he loses his Shem Rodef. Once having forfeited his Shem Rodef, if he kills the Nirdaf, he's a Rotzeach. If the Nirdaf could have been saved without killing the Rodef, then the killing of the Rodef constitutes and qualifies as Ritzicha. And that's going to get Yoav off the hook. Now, if we're saying that in a case where the Nirdaf could have been saved by shooting for the legs of the Rodef, and instead the Rodef was killed, that makes the Nirdaf into a Rotzeach. And by the way, when I say the Nirdaf, it could have been a third party as well. So let's say Ruvain is pursuing Shimon. Levi, as a bystander, is trying to save, and he's obligated to save Shimon, but he didn't have to kill Ruvain to save Shimon. So he's got to go through the legal process of saving Shimon in a way that he can take Ruvain to justice in front of the courts. And if he goes ahead instead, this third party, or for that matter, the Nirda, and kills the Rodef, he is a Rotzeach. And that's why Avner is considered a Rotzeach, and Yoav is off the hook. Because Avner, to save himself, could have shot for the legs of Asol. Everybody have that. So again, at this point, we're arguing that if the Shem Rodef is removed we'll call it Hafkah Shem Rodef, then anyone who kills the Rodef is a Rotzeach and will be put to death. Yoav will not be put to death because Avner is a Rotzeach. Why is Avner Rotzeach? Yoav is really doing exactly what Bezdin would have done to Yoav, to Avner. Basically, Yoav is like the extended arm of the courts in killing Avner. Why? Because Avner is worthy of death because he didn't kill a Rodef. What does that mean? He didn't kill a Rodef. Certainly Asol was a Rodef, but the answer is when is the Rodef called the Rodef? Only when it's absolutely necessary to kill the Rodef in order to save the Nirdaf. But if we can circumvent that and save the Nirdaf without killing the Rodef, then he's not a Rodef. And Kolshkein, the Kal V'chomer, if the Rodef turns his back and he runs away because he realizes that the Matzil is overwhelming him, is going to kill him, certainly we can't kill him. At best, we can incarcerate him, bring him to justice. But we certainly can't kill him because he's not involved even in a Ma'aser Redifa. He's now running as a fugitive. So when we get back to the discussion about killing a terrorist, well, it's one thing to kill a terrorist when he's about to kill you or kill someone. It's another thing to try and kill the Rodef, meaning the Machabel, the terrorist, when he's running away from you. And in Mirza Hashem, we're going to get back to the famous case of Oriel Azariah with an Aleph, not Azariah with an Ayin, who killed a Machabel who was tied up, who was bound. No Ma'aser Redifa. The terrorist is not endangering anyone's life.
I don't think he was tied. I think he was already neutralized. He was already shot and lying on the ground.
Right, but he was not dead, but
he was incapacitated.
He could not kill anyone.
Right, he was incapacitated.
I call it neutralized. Okay, you want to call it incapacitated? It's a question of language, but we mean the same thing. And the judgment against him was that he basically killed a Rodef. I'm sorry, he killed a terrorist in cold blood. If I'm not mistaken, check me out on Google. I think he's still sitting in jail, if I'm not mistaken. No, he's out already?
I think he was there a long time ago.
Oh.
And I think his sentence was commuted. I don't remember.
Yeah, he got an early pardon, I think.
Okay, I don't remember. But for sure, in the first round, they found him guilty.
But I don't know if he was convicted of murder or violating the rules of engagement. I'm not sure which one it was.
Oh, all right.
I could be wrong. I don't know.
I don't want to get off on a tangent. Okay. We'll have to come back to that, and that'll be a sugya for us to talk about neutralizing terrorists. But are you following my kav here, my line of reasoning? The halacha says that there's something called a Ma'aser Redifa, and that generates the halacha that the Rodef is chayav misa. But it's only because and conditional on the necessity, the absolute necessity to save the nirdaf. Do you follow? The Shem Rodef here is in a certain sense relative. You follow me? It's not an absolute. The fact that the Rodef wants to kill you doesn't mean he's a Rodef. A Rodef is chayav misa. But it's conditional on the status of the nirdaf and the relationship between the nirdaf and the Rodef, and to what extent the nirdaf could only be saved by killing the Rodef. And that's called Yochel Atzilo B'Yachid Meivara. But now we see the Gemara in Sanhedrin, and the Gemara in Sanhedrin seems to assume that Avner, insofar as he was Yochel Atzilus Atzmo B'Yachid Meivarav Shel HaSoil, and nevertheless Avner went ahead and killed HaSoil, Avner becomes a Rotzeach, and Avner is meant to be put to death. Who actually put him to death? It was Yoav. Yoav was, as I said, doing the work of the Bezdin. And therefore Yoav is off the hook on that count. So we see clearly that as soon as we can, save the nirdaf, then the Rodef, even though he's pursuing the nirdaf, he's no longer the Rodef. Again, the Rodef here is absolutely committed to killing the nirdaf. That's what he's doing. That's what he's interested in. That's his That's the badge that he wears on his collar. And yet, he's not a rodef. How could that be? How can you tell me that there's no chiyuv misa on the rodef when he's a rodef? And he's involved in the Ma'aser Redifa? The answer is that if we can neutralize the rodef, meaning protect the nirdaf without killing the rodef, the whole ball game of rodef, which means that we can circumvent Bezdin, is completely parka, it's completely removed. Now, there's a complicated situation in the Rambam, in two different Rambams. One Rambam you'll see number 11 if you're on page 2, and I always ask you to print out these pages if you can. And that's the Rambam in Hilchos Rotzeach Perek Aleph. Then we have a second Rambam, which you'll see is number 13 in Hilchos Malachim Perek Tes. The difference between the two Rambams is not relevant to the main thrust of the Rambam, which is called Ein Bezdin B'Misano, so we'll get to that. But rather, the difference between the two Rambams, they're basically a repetition, is that in one case, that's the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, the Rambam sets up a contrast between a Ben Noach and a Yisrael, and the rules of the game change. And the Rambam is now going to address the following question. The Nirdaf, or for that matter, another Matzil, another Machir, killed the Rodef unnecessarily. What do I mean by unnecessarily? Could have shot for the legs. What do we do with the person who killed the Rodef? Do we put him to death? We said, based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin about Yoav killing Avner, that since Avner could have saved himself without killing Asoil by shooting for the legs, therefore Avner is a Rotzeach, has to be put to death by Bezdin. And we said that Yoav is really just doing the dirty work of Bezdin and putting Avner to death. Correct? Can you tell me if you're following me?
Mm-hmm.
Yet the Rambam says no. If we killed the Rodef, and we didn't have to kill the Rodef, and the Rodef was killed unnecessarily, Ein Bezdin B'Misanos. And the Rambam repeats himself. Let's take a look at the two Rambams inside. First, in Hilchos Rotzeach Perek Aleph, Kol hayachol atzilo b'echud eivar v'lo tarach b'kach, ela hitzil b'nafsho shel Rodef v'hargo. He did not have to kill the Rodef in order to save the Nirdaf, and he went in and killed the Rodef. We said that in such a case, he doesn't have a shame Rodef. And therefore, the one who kills him, like Avner, who kills Asoil, is to be put to death by Bezdin. Says the Rambam, Hareza Shofech Damim. It's true that he spilled innocent blood. I wouldn't call him so innocent. But nevertheless, Ein Bezdin B'Misanoso. So again, if you printed out these pages, just by show of hands, does anybody here in the audience who printed out the pages? Okay, that's not good enough. I know you're all into ecology and you don't want to waste paper because it destroys the environment. I'll pay for the paper, and when the environment comes up, I'll plead guilty for that. Because what I want you to do, I just sent you 7 pages. What I want you to do is underline and highlight certain things. You can't do that on your phone. Well, maybe you can do it on your phone. Okay, if you do it on your phone, that's fine. We just saved the ecological system 7 pages. Okay.
On the computer. I have it on the computer. You just bold.
Good. So you know how to do. I have no clue how you bold something on a computer. I'm sure it's a very easy task, but for me, it's like teaching an old dog new tricks. Anyway, so the Rambam says, Ein Bezdin B'Misanoso. Please underline those words, which means that he's not a Rotzeach. But yet the Rambam says he's a Shofech Damim. Now, there are many cases where the Rambam says that you're a Shofech Damim, but we can't put you to death. And the Rambam has cases in Hilchos Rotzeach where he ties up a person on a railroad track and he's killed, and ties the person up in the sun. or Metzamtzem, he keeps him down to the water, all different types of cases where he's a Shofech Damim, but he's not a Rotzeach. A Rotzeach is someone who is put to death by Bezdin. The Rama repeats himself again in Hilchas Malachim Perek Tes, number 13 on your page, but here he talks about a contrast between a Ben Noach and Yisro. Both are in the same situation. Ben Noach shaharag nefesh, afilu ubar b'mei imo. Now note the halacha is that if a Jewish physician would, what's the word I want to use? Not implement. He would, anyway, do an abortion, then we cannot put him to death. But a Ben Noach who kills the ubar, neragol. V'chenim harag treifa, neragol. O kafso v'nosel fnei ties him down and he's killed by a rain track, by the railroad tracks, or by a line. Hinicho bara'av ad shaves. He ties him down and he dies of starvation. Hoil v'hemis mikol makom means indirectly, nera. V'chein, in horeg rodef, sheyachal atzil bechad be'varav, neragol. Which makes absolute sense. Because, forgetting about Ben Noach, even if I were to bracket the words Ben Noach, the same halach should apply to Yisrael, except for the Ram and Hilchos Rotzeach that we started with. Because logically, based on the Gemara of Yoav and Avner, we see that Avner is considered a Rotzeach, which justifies Yoav as a Gol Adam to kill Avner, because Avner could have saved himself from Asoil, the Rodev, without killing the Rodev. And therefore, Avner becomes a Rotzeach. So when the Rambam says, Hareza Nerag Olav, because he was Yochel Atzil Verot, it makes absolute sense. But now the Rambam is going to say that halacha only applies to a Ben Noach. Masha Ein can be Yisrael, and then we go back to the Rambam in Hilchos Rotzeach, who's addressing Yisrael, and in Yochel Atzil Echad Bifarv, Ein Bezdin B'Misan also. So the Ravid comments, Omar Avram, Kasha Le'avner.
And what did they say?
Just 1 second. Somebody has their thing open here. Oh. Doesn't work. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
You tried to unmute me. You didn't try to mute the person. You need to mute another person. I was muted. You try to unmute me. You need to mute the person that's not muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. So how do I know who's not muted? Okay, fine. If anybody could do me a favor and okay.
Everybody's muted now. Everybody has like the icon.
All right, I'm not going to ask, who was unmuted, because, then everyone should get up and say, oh, it was me, right? Recho Nodev. All right. So the Ravid points out the Gemara that we started with of Avner. Avner, we said, the bottom line of that Gemara is considered Rotzeach. Why? Because he could have saved himself without killing without killing the Rodef. And Yoav is just doing the job of Bezdin, putting Avner to death there. So the Radbaz wonders about two things. First, he wonders, why didn't the Ravid make this comment back in Hilchos Rotzeach? Like, why did he wake up in Hilchos Malachim? And secondly, the language of the Ravid, Kasha li Avner, sounds like I have a difficulty with Avner. He's not saying that the Rambam is wrong. He seems to be. Now if you take a look at the Radbaz, he uses a very famous Gemara terminology. If you take a look, it's about 5 lines up before the end of paragraph number 14, the Radbaz, he says, Nir Elisha Raivitzal in Velav V'Rafya B'Yodim. You familiar with that phrase? I know, Rav Yaakov, you're interested in like Talmudic phrases. This is one you should write down because it appears all the way throughout Shas. In v'lav v'rafi v'nother. It's such a cute Talmudic phrase. Yes, no, and it was weak in his hands. It was loose in his hands. Basically, he's saying that the Ravid himself was very confused. The Ravid didn't understand what was the legal right of Yoav to kill Avner if, according to the Rambam, Avner is not a Rotzeah. And the proof of the pudding is because the Rambam says we cannot put him to death. So you'll say, but the Rambam says we do put him to death. That's only a Ben Noach. But Avner is not a Ben Noach. And therefore, as a Yisrael, we cannot put him to death, which means that he's not a Rotzeah, which makes Yoav into a Rotzeah, if you're following the domino theory here. So the Ravid himself was confused. However, says the Radbaz, the Tur was not confused. And he said,
the Ravid, he's maksha that on the Rambam. He's saying kashalei Avner. He's saying it's kasher on the Rambam from the case of Avner. It's not like the Ravid saying it doesn't say
Right.
kashalei. It says kashalei Avner. So he's like,
okay,
when the
maybe
Ravid-
I don't know if
Ravid
it
is
says
must
Li
be the
or
Rambam
Le,
all the
you
time.
know, you never know in the Ravid whether it says Li or Le, you know, it's a difference of a
let's say
unit.
kashalei Avner, meaning like the Rambam
I don't know
says
if it's
but
Le
no,
or Li. Do you hear me, Adam? Again, I'm going to say it a third time. It could be said Kasha Li. Anyway, whatever it is, I'm just presenting the Radbaz.
I'm just saying it's very understandable to say kashalei because he's saying Rambam says such and such. Well, it's kash on him from Avner.
Correct, but tell me why the Ravid didn't say, as he usually says, Omar Avram lo Omar v'lo klum. You know, why doesn't he disagree with the Rav? Anyway, again, let's not make a big deal about it. The Radbaz is of the opinion that the Ravid was caught in a bind. He just didn't know how to work this out. He also may have agreed fundamentally that we can't kill the Nirdaf who killed the Rodef as a Rotzeach, but Kashalei Avner, the Gemara seems to assume in the case of Avner that Avner is considered Rotzeach because there was no need to kill a soul, namely the Rodef, and therefore it's Pakashem Rodef. But he says the Tur was absolutely certain about it. 3 lines up and a half from the end of the paragraph. Vatur Kasil Shanu, Eini Yodea. Eini Yodea is a stronger language, meaning I don't recognize what the Rambam writes, but Kevan Shechayev Misa, Lama Ein Bezdin Misa also. How can you tell me on the one hand he's Chayev Misa, on the other hand say Ein Bezdin Misa also? In other words, the Tur is accusing the Rambam of what we call a stira minei ubei. The Rambam is contradicting himself. The bottom line is, from this whole sugya, that we're not 100% sure if, in a case of Yochel Atzil Mechid, if Pakalei Shem Rodef. It sounds like there's still a vestige of the Shem Rodef, which means that although Avner is not necessarily justified in killing a soil, but on the other hand, he's not a full-fledged Rodef. I'm sorry, again, he's not a full-fledged Rotzeah. Why? Because Avner was killing a Rodef, meaning that Asal still retains some sort of quasi status as a Rodef. So this is
could it be just that the Beis Din has no way of ascertaining without any shadow of a doubt that Nitan Latzilo Bechel Meivarav?
No, that's not so. I think the Gemara assumes it was definitely Nita Letzil Echad V'Varav. The only reason why we assume Avner to be a kind of a Rotzeach, although the Rambam says he's not a full-fledged Rotzeach, is because they understood how deliberately he put the knife, the sword, in the right place, if you know what I mean.
Sorry, can we distinguish between, I've got a cold, but can we distinguish between a Gal Adam and Beis Din?
Well, there's Machlokas Tanoi whether Gol Adam is obligated to put the Rotzeach to death, or he's allowed to put the Rotzeach to death. Right. So maybe, we'd have to analyze the sugi of Gol Adam. But again, let's get back on track. Rabosa, I need your attention here. I want you to focus single-mindedly on one question, and that is Hafkas Shem Rodef. And we find here, if we take the Rambam on the one hand and the Tur on the other hand, that the Tur is claiming there's a Hafkas Shem Rodef. And you can have a Rodef who's actually involved in a Meiser Redifa, and yet he's not a Rodef at all. And if he's not a Rodef at all, if you kill him, you're a Rotzeach. You're going to be put to death. What makes you a Rodef who's not a Rodef? Yochel Atzilo, Bechem Eivar. But the Rambam on the other hand is saying, no, he still has a Shem Rodef. despite the fact that Yochel Atzilo B'Echad Beivar. Does that mean that we're allowed to kill? We're allowed to kill the Rodef? No, we can't kill the Rodef. We have to shoot for the legs. But if we went ahead, full steam ahead, and we killed the Rodef, we can't put you to death. And that opens up the possibility that you could have someone who's not really involved in a Meiser Redifa, and yet we're allowed to put him to death. If you're following. In other words, I'm going to try to widen this opening based on the Rambam to broaden it to other areas, other cases, other scenarios, to show you that you might have a situation in which the Rodef is not involved in destroying the life of the Nirdaf, and yet he's a Rodef, and we can kill him. Again, in the Rambam's case, it's a very narrow petach, because he's only saying that if we killed him, we're not considered a Rotzeh, but he's not willing to go so far that, he's still a Rodef. But I want to prove to you,
Can I
based on the
interrupt?
Mishnah, give me 1
Can I
minute.
interrupt the question? So, if
Moshe,
I understand,
can you give me just, go
okay,
ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It's just different between Zoom and face-to-face.
Sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
So I just want to point out to you that I want to prove a major breakthrough. And my whole shir is going to be built on this Mishnah Lamelech in Hilchas Chovel Umaz, which is number 15 on the bottom of your page 2, that there's such a thing as a Rodef who's going to be killed. The halacha is going to allow you to kill him, even though he's not involved in a Meiser Adifa. And this Mishnah Lamelech is based on a Rivash. So let's say the Mishnah Lamelech of Yaakov Rosnas lived, let's say, 350 years ago, and the Rivash lived about 6 centuries ago, at the end of the Tkufa of the Rishonim, and the Rivash is in turn quoting the Rashba, who was probably 9 centuries ago. You follow, there's a whole stream here. And the sugya is a moser. Now again, this would require hours and hours of research, exactly who is a moser. And books have been written on this, especially history books and shuvas. But let's suffice, we'll give a very superficial definition of a moser. A moser is a, what word am I looking for? He's a self-declared enemy of the Jewish people. His goal in life, his very essence, he wears a badge on his shoulder. He's going to work on behalf of the government, the anti-Semitic government, to report Jews to the government and bring them to the point in which Jews will be accused for X, Y, and Z, for whatever violations of the governmental rules. They will be incarcerated and even put to death. Their possessions will be confiscated. All these fit into Moser. In fact, Chazal suffered so much from Mosrim over the course of Jewish history that they added another bracha to our daily 3 times a day Shmon Esrei against the Mosrim. And that's V'la Moshinim al Sisik. Whole sugya in the Gemara, who was able to write this paragraph, this bracha, Shmuel HaKatan, whatever. We're not going to go into that now. And if you take a look at the Mishnah Lamelech, he quotes the Beis Yosef, who in turn quotes the Rashba, and we're going to see the Rivash on the top, page 3. And he says the following: If Ragil Lassos came, we're talking about, I don't have to tell you that the worst sorrows that we suffered from in Jewish history are from Jews, unfortunately. I mean, if you go through the period of the Inquisition and you read Nisana Toka, whatever you want to read, you'll always come back to this Meshumad, this Moser, the thorns and thistles of the Jewish people. I mean, the Gemara says, who gave the Romans the Eitzah to attack the Jewish religion in the persecution? It was none other than Yossi ben Yoezer's nephew. Yossi ben Yoezer is one of the Chachmei HaMesorah. And in the period of Hanukkah, we talk about the Misyavnim. They were the worst enemies of the Jewish people. Born Jews. In any event. So the Rashba says, Kol ha'omer lasos ki'ilu asa. When a person declares that this is my goal, this is my agenda, this is what I want to do, I am dedicated to the task of destroying the Jewish people, take him for his word. Ki'ilu asa. And the implication of the Rashba is that right now he is not involved in a Maisa of Moser, a Maisa Masira, but he's a tried and true self-declared Moser. And he's Ragil B'kach. But at this moment, he's not involved in a Masira, but he's good for his word. And if he says, Lasos, this is what I'm going to do, this is my program, then Ki'ilu Asa. And he quotes a sugya of Rav Shiloh. I was not able to find that sugya, unfortunately. I have a Mishnah Lamelech from the Frankel edition of Rambam. Maybe he'll tell you where the sugya of Rav Shiloh, or maybe you can do me a favor and find it in Bar Ilan or whatever. Shalohimtin liros hayamdu b'dvar. We're not going to wait anymore. By the way, this sounds very similar to what we mentioned at the outset of our discussion about the Baba Machteres. The Baba Machteres is good for his job. His job is, if necessary, in order to steal the Mona Lisa from your house, he's going to kill you, if necessary. Right? He's good for his word. We take him seriously. We're not going to consider the possibility that he's not a threat to the Jewish people, a threat to the Balabayas. And there, I think we're getting to a new breakthrough in our concept of a rodef. That perhaps you can have a rodef who right now is not involved in a Meiser Adifa. And this could have tremendous repercussions on the case of a terrorist who's running away. He has turned his back. He is no longer at this moment a threat to anyone. And yet, Hashkem v'hargo. He's a self-declared enemy of the Jewish people. That's all he's interested in is, I am Hamas. I want to kill the Jews. Is he now involved in a Meiser Adifa? No. The Moser is not, but he's Ki'ilu Asa. And if you take a look at the Rivash, which is on page 3, which is the Hemshech of the Mishnah Lamelech, quoting the Rivash, he says the following, that for a Rodef to be killed, to be put to death, he has to have a Chiv Misa. And in that sense, killing the Rodef means stepping into the shoes of Bezdin, right? As we said before, Yoav is like the long arm of Bezdin. And so too, whoever is saving the Nirdaf, let's say the Nirdaf himself kills the Rodef, he's the long arm of Bezdin. Well, in order to postulate that the Rodef is Chayav Misa, you need a Hasra. Comes along the Rivash, and he says, you don't need a Hasra. Go ahead and kill the Rodef without Hasra. And that has to do with the sugya, if you remember, that we learned together back in the old days about a Katan. Katan of a Rodef Achar Chavero. We can put him to death without Hasra. He's a Labar Hasra. And he goes on to mention the concept of Adam Bahul al Nafsho Lahatzel Atzmo. We're not going to expect a Nirdaf at that moment when his life is in danger and he's being threatened to be killed by the Rodef, to expect the Nirdaf to now give Asra to the Rodef. No. So once again, without Asra, L'chora, the Rodef is not a Rodef. Who says such a thing? Berzon is saying such a thing. You can argue against me. But Lefi Ani is Daiti, the way I understand it, if a Rodef is Chayav Misa, then there's no such thing as a Chayav Misa without what? Without a Hasra. John, do you mind closing the door for me, if you don't mind? So, what does it mean that according to the Rivash, the Nirdaf could kill the Rodef to save himself, even without Asra? Where's the Chayav Misa here? But we see that the halachas of Rodef go way beyond our limitations. And not only that, quoting the Rashba, it seems that we could kill a Moser, even though now the Moser is not involved in a Meiser Adifa. It's all, if I could use the term, it's Al Shema Asid. If you don't kill him now, he's going to kill in the future. And that means that he's good for his word, Uki'ilu Asa. Thank you so much. And I'd like to show you a Minchas Chinuch, which is on page 3, number 17, and a tshuva for a Moshe Feinstein, which is on the bottom of page 4. Now, again, this is a long Minchas Chinuch, and we really should go through the whole thing from beginning to end, but I'm just going to sort of pinpoint or highlight one line in the Minchas Chinuch that's on the bottom of 17 on page 3. Count up from the bottom of the paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. He says the following. In terms of a third party, that's Levi, who's a spectator, who's trying to save Shimon from Ruvain the Rodev, we're going to differentiate between Yochel Atzilo B'Echad Mivarav and Eino Yochel Atzilo B'Echad. In other words, there's going to be Afkar Shem Rodev, which allows you to impose a Chiyuv Misa on the Rodev and put the Rodev to death in a case where you could save the Nidaf without killing the Rodev. Avol, HaNirdaf Atzmo, again, I think this is another reverberation of the Rivash that we saw on the top of this page in the Mishnah Melech. And this is going to contradict the Sugi of Avner, because we established that Avner was Chayav Misa as a Rotzeach, and yet Avner himself was the Nirdaf. V'tzarech Ir. But once again, I'm trying to see in this Minchas Chinuch breaking new ground that the Shem Rodef is very relative. It's not absolute. From one perspective, it's conditional on Eino Yochel Hatzilo Becha Mivara. But for another perspective, that of the Nitzal, of the Nirdaf himself, there's a Shem Rodef that's not conditional on Eino Yochel Hatzilo Mivara. That's a double negative. Meaning, even though it's Yochel Hatzilo Becha Mivara, he kills the Rodef. And put that together with the Rambam that we started with in 2 places. The Rambam says that if you killed the Rodef unnecessarily, you could have neutralized him and saved the Nirdaf without killing the Rodef. The Rambam says, Ein Bezim Misanos, which means that there's still a vestige of the Shem Rodef. So again, what I'm trying to present to you is like, in Hebrew, we call it Hadragah. There are graduated levels of a Shem Rodef. There's a full-fledged Rodef, a half-shem Rodef. It's like really complicated. And it could be that according to the Rambam, in the case of Yochel Atzilo B'Echad Beifarav, he still has the Shem Rodef, even though it's not necessary to kill him in order to save the Nirdaf. And therefore, in Bezim Avisan also. And then the Raifid's Kasha from Avner. And according to Minchas Chinuch, we're going to say that as far as the third party is concerned, the Matzil, the Nirdaf, could be saved in another way, and therefore the Rodef is not called a Rodef. But as far as the Nirdaf himself is concerned, we still consider the Rodef a Rodef. You could put it, the Nirdaf could put the Rodef to death, even though what? Even though it's Yochel Atzilo B'Echad Beivara. So there still is some sort of quasi-Shem Rodef. And now I want to show you the tshuva of Moshe Feinstein. Now, to be honest with you, I understand the kasha of Moshe. I'm not sure that I'm absolutely at home with his answer. You remember the sugi that we learned together maybe 5 months ago? I don't remember anymore on the calendar when it was, about the following case. The man digs a tunnel, I shouldn't use that word, it's scary these days, but tunnels his way into the house of the Balabayas. He's called the Baba Machteres, correct? And what happens? I call this Mida Keneged Mida, the divine, supervision here. The tunnel collapses over his head. That's called Nafal of Hagal. And guess what day of the week it is? You guessed it, it's Shabbos. And the question is, if possibly the Bava Machteres is still breathing, he's still alive, are we allowed to violate the Shabbos in order to save the Bava Machteres? And the Gemara says no. Let him die. We will not be Mechal Shabbos on behalf of the Bava Machteres. And Rav Moshe asks why. He says, after all, the Bava Machteres is neutralized. He's down there under the debris. He is no longer a menace. He's no longer jeopardizing the life of the Balabayas. You cannot call him a Rodef. It's no Meiser Adifa. The Chiddush of the Torah is that he's a Rodef as soon as he breaks into the house, with his gun. But now he's deep down under the debris. He doesn't jeopardize anyone's life. And if you leave him be, he's just going to expire. So why shouldn't we be Mechal Shabbos for him? And somehow, pulling a rabbit out of his hat magically, Rav Moshe says he still is a Rodef. But yet he's a Rodef for that a Meiser Adifa. Says Rav Moshe, look at his language. He says that once he breaks into the Balabais' house, he's Chashiva Kigavra Ketila. But now, he's no longer Rodef, and he's buried under debris. He's no longer a Rodef. He's no longer a Gavra Ketila. If he's not a Gavra Ketila, the Torah says, V'chai bohem v'lo sheyomes behem, we violate the Shabbos to save someone's life. Ism kain my taima ein mefachenes agal b'Shabbos latzila. And we say that if you kill the Rodef without needing to do so, because right now he's not jeopardizing your life because you can neutralize it by shooting for the legs, then you are a Rotzeach. And that's the Pashas Sugya of Avner, and that's the Psak of the Tur. V'tzarech lomar, the Kash is great, but I don't know the answer. The Kevan de Nofel of Hagal, be Odshay Rodef, we freeze the frame. He was a Rodef when he broke into the house and he was tunneling into the house. That point, he's a Rodef. He's jeopardizing the life of the Balabayas. Lo nitar shuv latzilo be'isur Shabbos. We can't be Mechal Shabbos. He's now considered a Gavra Ketila. Why? He's breathing underneath the debris. Why is he Gavra Ketila? Oh, you're going to call him a Rodef. Why is he Rodef? He's neutralized. He says, "V'edo b'chlal stam adam shenemar bo v'chai bohem," to violate the Shabbos. Again, I take Rav Moshe's tshuva to mean that you could have a shame rodef without a meiser adifa. Right now, there's no meiser adifa. The man is buried underneath the ground, and yet we could kill him. Not kill him, but he's like a Gavra Ketila. So again, we see that there's some vestige of a Shem Rodef, even without a Meiser Adifa. Because otherwise, the law of V'chai ben v'lo sheyomes spent in Mechal Shabbos would apply, and it doesn't. We suspend that law because he was a Rodef at the time that he was avalanched underneath the debris. Okay, Rabbi said, with that, we'll stop for tonight. And B'li Neder, if you don't mind, I'd like to finish this up next week. We have a tshuva here from many different Rosh Yeshiva. We have a tshuva from Rav Yaakov Ariel, who has a yeshiva in Ramat Gan. He's also chief rabbi there. We have a tshuva from Ra'ema Cohen. I forgot the name of his yeshiva. I think it's called Yerucham, if I'm not mistaken.
Otniel.
Oh, Otniel. So I always get confused between Otniel and Yerucham. And we have a tshuva from Shlomo Aviner. And we're going to talk about our favorite Azariah, not me, but Azariah with an Aleph. And we'll try to finish up from pages 5 to 7 next week. But next week is Hanukkah. So I don't know. We're praying in Hanukkah for Vayom Lahem B'zman Hazeh. We need some Nisan there. Okay, then. So I'm going to
maybe we'll have a vote on what's on the chat group. We'll have a vote whether to have.
Can you take care of that, David? Your mind? Can I impose that?
David, it's his job.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And if I don't see you,
David,
have a freilich Chanukah.